Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Oh, Tony, it's one of our favorite shows where we get to speculate on the many, many possible future versions of college football. We're diving into the college football multiverse. Will Florida State be in the SEC? Will North Carolina be in the Big Ten? Will the ACC continue to exist? Tony, anything is possible. What a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. And here I thought college football expansion is done. Everybody's happy with where they're at. Everybody's being paid equally. So why would you be upset about somebody else, what they're making? But it turns out, in fact, the Big Ten and the SEC are making way more money than anybody else. And as we have talked about previously, eventually other schools are going to be like, well, we need help here. And so that's basically what's going on in the ACC right now, as 7 members have banded together to complain about the other 7 members, basically, and also the contract that they are all together latched into one of the worst contracts in sports history, a contract that Bobby Bonilla, frankly, scoffs and laughs at and points at. But this is a 20-year deal with ESPN that goes through 2036. And so those 7 schools that are upset, I don't know if it was Brett McMurphy who gave them this name, or he's just reporting what somebody else called them, the Magnificent 7. And Tom, I find very little magnificence here, but these are the 7 schools: Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, Miami, North Carolina State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech they're upset. Now, the ACC meetings are going on right now, and so these guys are all trying to talk it out, as I think Miami's AD said, like family, and this is a family thing, and it's basically like one side of the family is like, to the other side, like, you need to get a job. You sleep on the couch while I'm paying for my room, and they're all like 30-year-old children arguing about, who's doing less while they're still living with their parents, that sort of thing. And so now you've got some discussions about revenue sharing, bonuses, basically win bonuses in the CFP, which is not going to come close to evening the deficit between the Big Ten and the SEC and the ACC. But you hear so many people talking, and it's like there seems to be no way out of this grant of rights unless the conference collapses. But even then, I've heard people say, like, you still don't know that actually works, because if they're still an ACC standing, then they still own those grant of rights. And so you've got all of these lawyers, and you try not to let it get contentious. At some point, it's probably going to, however. And I heard Wednesday morning on one of the radio shows that there's only one copy of the ACC grant of rights, and it's like kept at the ACC headquarters, like probably in a vault somewhere. Like the Vatican keeps, stuff that they've got. This is basically what the ACC has, and it's like, well, can we see? No. You cannot see. Trust, it's there. You are not qualified to look upon our grant of rights contract.
Somewhere just now, Nicolas Cage was sitting at home and was just like, oh, I've got an idea. National Treasure. I don't know. What are they up to? 4 or 5? Yeah.
Regional Treasure. Regional Treasure. The ACC TV contract, grant of rights. Yes, that is going to be. Thriller might be a strong word, but there's a lot at stake here. So I guess the MacGuffin here is something with some real tangible value. And just, I feel like every time we talk about grant of rights, I'm sure like 60% of our audience knows at least basically what we're talking about, and 40% are like, what? That's what? Is that grant who?
Who? Yeah, exactly. Is that a 2025 cornerback recruit? Who is this? Yes. So grant of rights is a legal term that conferences have come up with, where as you sign a new TV deal, so the Big Ten signed its new TV deal last year, whenever it was, and they're getting, a $sign Texas basically every year for their TV rights. part of that deal from the TV network side is, okay, how do we know you guys are going to stay together? Well, there's a clause in there called a grant of rights. And the grant of rights means that for the length of this contract, you are taking all of the money from the TV deal that is due to you, and you are granting it to the conference, and then the conference will pay it back out. So it's just basically like it's going to the conference. The conference can, hold it in escrow and then distribute it to you. So there's just sort of the conference is acting as a middleman. So if I am Florida State and I have signed this grant of rights through 2036, and then I leave to go play in the SEC. Well, now my TV rights are coming through the SEC, and so the TV network has to pay the money, but that money's going to the ACC. Even though I'm a member of the SEC, I don't get it because the ACC still owns my TV rights through 2036. That's sort of the short version of this. So now the question is, okay, what will it take to break that? Because the ACC, you mentioned earlier that this is, shaping up to be one of the worst TV deals in college football history. Why would you sign a TV contract for 20 years, which is what it was, I believe, 2016 to 2036 for, $30 million a year, or whatever it ends up being? It was something in that neighborhood. That sounded like a lot of money in 2016. Well, guess what has happened to TV rights and TV revenue since then? It has gone through the move. It is basically TV revenue in college football is basically the only thing that is the stonks meme right now. It's just the line go up basically since 2016. And for the ACC, the line has just sort of been flat. And the reason was the ACC, looked at the Big Ten network, looked at the SEC and ESPN and said, well, we want the ACC network. And ESPN said, okay, you can have the ACC network. And then a monkey paw curled, and they said, but you have to sign, it's going to be $30 million a year, whatever it was. And it's going to be through 2036. And the ACC said, yes, look at us. We're a big boy. We have a conference TV network now. Hooray. And then the ink got dry on the contract, and everyone else's TV prices went up. And the ACC was looking around like, when does our line go up? And they said 2036. And it turns out that's a while in the future. So now you're up to speed on why everyone in the ACC is a little bit grumpy right now. And then the question is, what are they going to do about it? And, we've talked on the past about unequal revenue distribution. The Big Ten does it. Everyone gets the same amount. Indiana football gets the same amount of money as Ohio State football, and Northwestern football gets the same amount of money as Michigan football. And you can argue whether that's fair or not, but that's the way the Big Ten has done it. So it has kind of kept the peace over the years. Conferences have done unequal revenue distributions. Boise State gets a bigger chunk of the Mountain West deal than the other schools do. Texas, with the Longhorn Network, ended up making a bunch of extra money compared to the rest of the Big 12. That worked out great. So that's why the Big 12 is still sturdy and hasn't changed at all in the last couple of years. Everyone's happy. So what the ACC is looking at doing right now is, Florida State and Clemson and some of those other schools want to split the pie unevenly and have, should Clemson get more money for the ACC TV deal than Boston College? I think you can make a very plausible argument that they should. But then, how are you going to divide that pie? That's all a question. And then, the real question, as you said, is the grant of rights enforceable? And, that's one of those questions that's impossible for us to answer. But there were two reports in SI this week from Ross Dellinger. One was, here's this group of 7 teams looking at trying to get out. And then, 2 days later, there was, these sort of awkward, like, no, we're all happy here together, which certainly suggests to me, Tony, like their lawyers came back and said, like, I don't think we can get out of this grant of rights.
Now, you can leave the ACC for like 3 years of TV revenue, which I've seen a number of like $120 million thrown around, but you still don't have your grant of rights. So I don't know. I guess if you're just gonna leave and only be on the radio, maybe that's one thing. Because although I'm not sure if the grant of rights extends to radio, so maybe that's a moot point, perhaps, if you will. But so you're not going to buy your way out and then also not be able to recoup. Like if you could pay $120 million to leave and secure your rights, you're going to be okay. Like that's a lot of money that you're going to be giving up. But you set up some payment plans, take out a loan. You can work it out. But basically, they would make that money back in several years, in a handful of years, because right now the ACC pays each school about $36 million. I think the next 2 years, this year and this year and next year, each Big Ten team is going to get like $60 million, and that goes up to $100 million in 2025. So there is no way especially with what I've read is that the ACC is not going to give unequal shares of the TV revenue. It would just be unequal shares of postseason revenue, where like, I guess if you make it, take it, that sort of thing. But you're talking, I don't know, $5-10 million in addition. And so now you're talking, say, $45 million. Well, you still have the Big Ten making $55 million more than you, and the SEC making $45-50 million more than you. It doesn't close the gap. And, I don't think there's anywhere to go. And even with the fact that you've got 7 teams or 7 schools very unhappy, I've seen talk about, could they form their own league? And, I don't see that happening. And even if they could, they'd probably just like, why wouldn't we just go to the Big Ten or the SEC? But then you also wonder, would South Carolina block Clemson? Would Florida block Florida State? Now we know Texas A&M didn't block Texas. I don't know that Texas A&M had a say in the matter. That's one of those things where it's like, just go sit in the corner and think about what you've done with that 10-year contract to Jimbo. You don't have any voice in this, because when you talk, bad things happen. And when you act, even worse things happen. So just, here's a coloring book. No, you cannot have a crayon. You'll put your eye out. Just look at the pictures. And black and white is plenty good enough for you. There's some pictures that maybe Oklahoma has colored in. Go ahead and check those out. But there's always been this talk about Clemson to the SEC, and it's like South Carolina would never have it. Same with Florida State to the SEC. So I think, Tom, it is beyond time for the Big Ten to move south. And I still think like Georgia Tech would be great. I have heard, I think it was Kevin said last year he had heard that Clemson was making a move to get into the AAU, which is something else that we should probably talk about, the American Association of Universities, which is what the Big Ten is part of and which they hold in high regard. But like, Florida State, which is not necessarily, I don't believe they're in the AAU or very close to it. But the move south for the Big Ten, I think, is the next step, along with trying to make UCLA and USC happy. I don't know how you marry those two without going to like basically a 20-team conference, if not more.
Yeah, okay. Let's start with the AAU. That is the Association of American Universities. This is another one of these things that we talk about periodically, and we don't expect you guys to remember, because this is one of these, why would you care outside of these these few narrow areas? The AAU is the Association of American Universities. It's basically a consortium of leading research institutions across the country. A lot of the schools you would expect, big research schools, very prestigious national schools. Harvard is in there. But big, Chicago, Dartmouth, a lot of the Ivy League schools, but also, the really prestigious public schools, big research public schools, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, Virginia, all the schools that are considered, prestigious or well thought of public universities with big research programs. That has for decades essentially been considered the table stakes to become a member of the Big Ten. You got to be a member of that. Because you got to remember, this is not head football coaches voting on new members of the conference. This is not athletic directors voting on new members of the conference. This is university presidents voting on new members of the conference. So they're going to be thinking a lot more about the chemistry department and the biology research dollars in these decisions than they are in terms of who's going to be good at football in 5 years. That's a factor, but there are plenty of other things that go into this. There is only one member of the Big Ten right now who is not a member of the AAU. That is Nebraska. They were a member of the AAU at the time that they joined the Big Ten. They lost their membership due to something to do with their research hospital actually being at the University of Nebraska Omaha campus and not the Lincoln campus. Your eyes are glazing over. You don't care. It doesn't matter. It's fine. What does matter is, okay, when we're looking through the list of potential future Big Ten members, you kind of go through this list. This is organized on their website in the dumbest possible way. It's just a bunch of logos, not alphabetical. So I'm just going to read through the Power 5 conference teams who are AAU members. This is essentially who are not in the Big Ten or the SEC. This is essentially like the teams that are at least plausible membership member candidates right now: Pittsburgh, Stanford, Duke, Virginia, UCLA is, of course, USC is, of course, University of Washington, Georgia Tech, Arizona, Colorado. Boy, there's a lot of schools here, but the University of Kansas on here, North Carolina, Texas, who just joined, and that's it. So, and Missouri is in, so Missouri could plausibly become a Big Ten member at some point, but they're in the SEC, so they probably don't have to. But it's like that's the kind of schools you're talking about. I was frankly surprised, Tony, that Georgia Tech was not on that list of 7 because you didn't hear me say North Carolina State there. Where exactly is North Carolina State going in all of this? Like, I can see the Big Ten wanting North Carolina. Okay. I can see the Big Ten wanting Virginia. Where is Virginia Tech going in this? Where is North Carolina State going in all of this? Are those teams that the SEC is going to be clamoring to add? I think you have it with Georgia Tech, a very prestigious school, great engineering school, located in Atlanta. I mean, walking distance from downtown Atlanta. I literally walked from the hotel we were at in downtown Atlanta to Bobby Dodd Stadium when we were down there for the Peach Bowl at one point last winter. There's a lot that Georgia Tech has to offer that, like, I understand why the SEC and the Big Ten aren't looking at Boston College or Syracuse or whatever. I was a little surprised Georgia Tech was not included in that group.
Yeah, Georgia Tech to the Big Ten makes so much sense to me because it is the heart of the SEC. Like, that is the SEC's heartbeat, Atlanta. And then to just go be like, you know what? Let's just put a university here. Let's put a Big Ten university here. Just plant the flag. It gets them in that footprint. It's a great market. It's a program with potential. And we've seen it. They've won as many national championships in the last 40 years as Michigan. So let's not forget about that. That makes sense to me. And it's one of those where it's like, yeah, like, when was the last time they were any good? It's like, I understand that, but it still feels like it would be a win. Pitt is also an AAU member. That would be, I think that one would make a lot of sense to Ohio State, but they're not one of those 7. They're not one of the magnificent 7s. I think they're one of the realist 7s, the realism 7, where they kind of know their role and shut their mouths, if you will. But I think that would be a good addition for the Big Ten. You hear people say Virginia and North Carolina, boom, as soon as this opportunity is open, they're in the Big Ten. And the way some people speak so confidently about that, people have talked to administrators, it's like, well, so then do we just chalk those two in? If anything happens where the ACC does collapse, and you'll know that those are 2 of the 7. Now, why are Virginia Tech and North Carolina State in there? Because they're attached to their big brothers. Basically, like if you've had a little brother, or you want to go out, and your parents like, you take your little brother with you, and this is what that is. Like probably the state government is like, you take your little brother with you. If you're going anywhere, take him with you. And I think, because I'm with you, like NC State, Virginia Tech, they are more in line with Pitt or any of those other like non-magnificent 7s, if you will. Like, I would say magnificent 4 is maybe the more accurate number, and that's still very loose, because what exactly has Miami done in the ACC if we're not talking about basketball, where they've been very good?
Yeah, that may be a location thing, and there is a history there, but it has been a hot minute for them, and Miami has been relevant more recently than Georgia Tech, but not that much more recently. I mean, like a decade and a little bit of change more recently than Georgia Tech. I always chalked up the North Carolina thing. North Carolina has been linked to the Big Ten for, seemingly decades. Jim Delaney, the former Big Ten commissioner, was a North Carolina grad, so there was always a little bit of an existing relationship there, maybe that might link them. And got to remember, what is the Big Ten chasing here? The Big Ten is chasing, the Rust Belt area. The Big Ten footprint is by and large a shrinking population center. Population has generally over the past few decades been moving south. North Carolina's growing a lot. Georgia's growing a lot. You're seeing, that population is sort of slowly migrating south. So having two members in Pennsylvania, I mean, yeah, Pitt would be a great geographic fit. What exactly does Pitt bring to the Big Ten? They are athletically okay. They are an AAU member, but what does that bring to the Big Ten that Penn State doesn't? What's the added value there? And I don't know that there's an answer.
I think the only value would be the rivalry with Penn State, and it creates a good product. But you've already got that footprint. So if we're just talking about footprints, that doesn't really do anything for you. I do think one of my favorite stats is in terms of what Miami has done in the ACC, and they joined the ACC, I believe, in 2005 or before then, but the ACC championship game, I guess, goes back to 2005 as I'm looking here on Wikipedia. But Duke has been in the ACC championship game as many times as Miami. They've been in it once. Notre Dame has been in it once. Virginia has been in it once. So those four programs, when Notre Dame has been in the ACC championship game as many times as you have not been very successful. Now, Georgia Tech, Tom, Paul Johnson used to have them in there like every other year because they were running the option, but they've been in it 4 times, and not since 2014. But there is a history there. Now, you would say go back to the option. I'm not going to say go back to the option, but some interesting stuff there. Wake Forest is interesting because their first appearance in the ACC championship game was 2006. Their most recent was 2021, but they've had some solid years throughout there where they've been interesting to watch as well. Not that, frankly, they might be a good fit in the Big Ten as well with the academics, but I also, with the AAU thing, we talk about it, but it doesn't count for Notre Dame.
Right. Notre Dame is sort of the exception to every rule there, and if Notre Dame is, I think, the only school that the AAU thing won't matter. And I think they've tried to bulk up their grad school programs over the last couple decades. So I think, Notre Dame is not in because their grad school is not necessarily at the level that the undergrad is. It's a great undergrad school, but it's, that's not the only thing that AAU comes into. As far as Georgia Tech goes, I don't know that Georgia Tech would need to run the option, because why does Georgia Tech need to run the option before? Well, Georgia Tech is a academically extremely prestigious school. It's a little like Northwestern. It's a little like, Rice. It's like Stanford, where you're getting your talent pool is so limited because that's an engineering school. It's a rambling wreck from Georgia Tech and a hell of an engineer. That's their fight song. That's right in their fight song. It's an engineering school. So you are limited in your talent pool because you've got to have people that can hack it academically at Georgia Tech, and that narrows your talent pool quite a bit. What I'm wondering is, okay, if Georgia Tech goes from $36 million a year to $100 million a year in TV revenue, okay, now you've got better facilities. Now you've got better staffing. You've probably got a higher level of strength coach. You've got a higher level of head football coach. You have a higher level of academic support. There's 100,000 things you could put that extra $60 million a year into. So, and then you're playing at a level way above. You're not playing at a level above Georgia financially, but you're playing at a level way above all the other schools in that region. And, now, okay, Virginia Tech, if Virginia Tech's still in the ACC or they move to the Big 12 or whatever it is, you're not at the same level as Virginia Tech anymore. You're not recruiting the same level of kids anymore. That's the kind of thing where Georgia Tech has always had to kind of do the weird thing. We talk about schools that should run the triple. Georgia Tech was a great example because you're working under these incredible constraints, so you have to do something a little weird and different. You have to zag while everyone else is zigging. And Stanford did that with the man ball thing under Harbaugh and sort of the early David Shaw years. Georgia Tech doesn't necessarily have to do that if, sometimes you can spend your way out of a problem. And, in the new world of the Big Ten, if Georgia Tech ends up there, they may be able to spend their way out of problems that they had to be a little more creative about in the past.
I just worry about giving Georgia Tech too much money, because then it's like, we've put AutoCAD on the the jumbotron, and every seat in the press box, and every suite has, let's all just do some engineering drawings. It's like, you're just wasting money at this point. This is not, you're supposed to be using it on NIL, on recruiting, on shady payments to players, stuff like that. I wonder is one team in the South good enough to add to the Big Ten? Like, if you're to do it, or do you have to go in a pair? And if are we already counting Virginia and North Carolina as in this instance? And then can you add a third? And then maybe you bring in a third from the Pac-12, and now you've got 3 in the South, 3 in the West. But is 22, is that a good place to stop, or do you just go to 24, Tom?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. And there are so many variables that go into this. And I think anyone who says with a great deal of confidence right now that they know exactly what's going to happen and who's going to be able to be, who's going to be able to jump and when, is a little bit of a charlatan, because, okay, what's the Pac-12's next TV contract going to look like? They haven't signed it yet. We don't know. I think the consensus right now is it's probably going to be somewhere in that $30-ish million range, around the level of the Big 12's TV contract. They're probably going to aim for a shorter term in that contract. That's what it sounds like the consensus is out west right now. You're going to aim for a 4 or 6 year contract, something like that. So that comes up late 2020s, maybe 2030, something like that. Okay, how much is that TV contract for? And then, if you get to 2030, the objection to Washington and Oregon joining the Big Ten in the last, that was something that Kevin Warren had sort of floated. Hey, can we have these, should we look at these guys? And they, looked at it, and it came back. They will not bring back the amount of money that we would be paying them. If it's a $100 million TV contract and their addition is only worth $50 or $60 million, well, that just means you're dividing the pie more ways and everyone's slice is a little bit smaller. So why would you do it? At the point of 2030, or 2028, or whenever that TV contract is up and their grant of rights potentially expires again, maybe they're willing to take a little bit of a smaller slice. Maybe you do get into the unequal distribution game, because are you better off making $60 million in the Big Ten when everyone else is making 100, and rather than making $30 million in the Pac-12 when everyone else is making 30? You might just be. And so you've got that on the Pac-12. You've got the grant of rights on the ACC. When, how can teams get out of it? How much will it cost them to get out of it? How much will they add? These are all sort of open questions. So, if you added, so they're at 16 right now, right? Big Ten? 16, including UCLA and USC, right? So you're at 16. If you add Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, okay, you're at 19. You add Stanford, you add USC and Washington and Oregon, you get to 21, and you get Notre Dame to 22. That's probably the only way you end up at 22, is if you have Notre Dame. Otherwise, you could also do it without those Western schools, and you end up at 20, and you go from LA to Atlanta, the whole Midwest, plus Notre Dame. That's a pretty appealing TV deal.
And at some point, I think once you get to 20, then you're going to start talking about Big Ten semifinal and finals, that sort of thing, and trying to work the schedule around that. But we didn't get a chance to talk about the University of Toronto. Anyway, that will do it for this episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, become a member, say hello to us there on the message board. Also, I must stress this so much. Mark Givler and Kevin Noon, doing their Southern Swing, have been putting out tremendous recruiting content, talking to all of the bigwigs, and on the OSU recruiting radar, Jeremiah Smith, like hours after Dylan Raiola commits to Georgia and everybody is in a panic, they are on the ground, standing shoulder to shoulder to Jeremiah Smith, talking about his feelings about Ohio State, and him telling, Buckeye fans, you've got nothing to worry about. I'm locked in. As long as Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are here, I'm not going anywhere. So they've been through Georgia, Florida, North Carolina. So check BuckeyeHuddle.com out, and there's a ton of interviews, a ton of insight from everybody there, especially on the message board. Mark Givler and Kevin with their updates, their daily updates about what's going on down south. And of course, you can find us at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.